Hi everyone, I'm back again. And today I'm going to be doing the Synastry chart between Hailey Baldwin and Justin Bieber. There's some really nice things between the two of them in this compatibility chart. However, I see a lot of fantasy and illusion centered as one of the main components between the two of them. And there's double whammies in the planetary department with Neptune and Uranus. But I'm going to go over the asteroids first and tell you how that really coincides with the planetary placements as well. His Alma conjuncts her sun. That's really nice. Alma has to do with soul, and he brings that into the relationship. His Juno conjuncts her Venus, and Juno has to do with marriage. So obviously there was a marriage, but Juno conjuncting Venus also has to do with he sees her as exactly what he needs. She projects this aura of love and beauty. And to him, that's very powerful effect on him. And there's a lot of fantasy and illusion in this relationship, like I said, because his Jupiter conjuncts her lust, Grimm, and Penelope, 2 degrees. Jupiter is the largest planet in the solar system, so whatever it conjuncts, it magnifies these energies. So his Jupiter is conjuncting her lust, and that's self-explanatory. There's a sexual pull here, which coincides with their Venus trine Mars aspect in the planetary department. His Jupiter is also conjuncting her Grimm and Penelope. And Grimm, it's like Grimm's fairy tales. There's this fairy tale. And as I roll along into this, you'll see more of that. I'll explain it to you. Now, his Jupiter is also conjuncting her Penelope, and that has to do with devotion. So I don't think that she cheated on him. There's rumors about him, or her actually, or maybe him too, that they're not faithful to one another, but I don't see that in this chart because I really looked for it and I couldn't find it. Also, her Pluto and Sun and Semper, which has to do with being there, always being there, and a devotion, loyalty, and that conjuncts his ascendant, which is a very important angle in a compatibility chart. So her Pluto and Sun conjuncting his ascendant, this is really powerful because he finds her alluring and sexy, and it's a classic weak in the knees aspect. And since her Sun is also conjuncting his ascendant, she brings light into his life with a very powerful and alluring energy. Now, when you have Pluto conjuncting your ascendant from the other person, not only does it indicate that there can be like a weak in the knees sexy pull, but the Pluto person can end up trying to control the ascendant person, which is him, and try to either remake or transform them in some way. Now, her Sun and Groom, Aphrodite and Semper, conjuncts his North Node. So again, there's this, she brings light into his life, and Aphrodite has to do with being a goddess. And Groom and Semper, there's devotion there, and it's conjuncting his North Node. So that's the theme of the relationship for him. I think he wanted to be, or wants to be, a good husband, and there's devotion and loyalty. But he's like a brat. I don't see him being very nice. And I'm going to get to all those aspects because it all ties in together. But I think he's just can be have temper tantrums and have anger issues. Now, his ascendant conjuncts his North Node and Pluto. And this can mean that he's secretly selfish because the North Node, and since it's conjuncting his ascendant, which is all about him, but it's also conjuncting his Pluto in the 12th house. So that's the house that rules secrets, and Pluto is there. So there's this powerful placement, strong emotions, and the desire for a journey into the subconscious, because that's what the 12th house rules. Pluto is in dignity here because it's in the sign of Scorpio. And Pluto naturally rules the 8th house. That rules death, drugs, sex. So Pluto is now takes a suitcase of all of that energy and brings it into the 12th house of his. So he feels this need to explore the subconscious part of him through those energies. And that's where the drugs came in. Also, her Chiron, Angel, Merlin, Karma, and Venus conjuncts his moon. Very powerful. The moon, a very important luminary, and all of these asteroids are holding hands. I'm going to break it down for you. So her Chiron is conjuncting his moon, and I'm not a big fan of Chiron and the moon together because that can bring a lot of emotional pain. However, on rare occasions, I have seen it bring healing. And in this case, I believe that to be true because he said at one point, she is very healing. She brings me a healing energy. And this would make sense to me because Chiron isn't there alone. Chiron is holding hands with Angel. And Angel has to do with a very strong dynamic of being best friends or heaven sent. And it's holding hands with Merlin, and Merlin has magical qualities. So she's holding this magic wand and she's there for him. She's like an angel with healing properties, and her Venus is also conjuncting his moon. So she brings all of this to him, and there's love there and karma as well. But his moon is conjuncting the asteroid Sato, and Sato has to do with sadistic behavior. So I don't think that he's a very nice person towards her. I mean, I don't know him personally, but from what I've heard and from what this chart is telling me, he can be emotionally mean. And he has a temper too. He can have like temper tantrums because in his natal chart, his Pluto is squaring his Mars. So there's anger issues involved here. His Nephili conjuncts her north node, 0 degrees. So the theme of the relationship for her is really a lot of cloudiness, smoke blowing, and fantasy, because Nephili, that's the energies this asteroid represents. And it's like a mini Neptune. Now, to further validate that, they have the double whammy aspect in the planetary department of his moon squares her Neptune, and her Neptune squares his moon, or vice versa. But there's a double whammy here. And this indicates fogginess, illusion, deception. When you have Neptune squaring moon, you can't really pin the other person down emotionally. You don't know where they're coming from, or they're just out in another world. And since there's a double whammy here, those energies are even more stronger. Also, his moon squares her Uranus, and her Uranus squares his moon. Again, more indication of they can't be there for each other emotionally on a level that would be, it's like they live on two separate islands emotionally because it's unstable. You expect the other person to be there for you, and they can't. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not, and you never know when they can give you the emotional, what you need emotionally from them. And it's more coming from her towards him because her Uranus and Neptune squares his moon. So there's very strong unavailability. And you can actually, I saw that when they're together. When they appear out in the public, you could see that. I would always wonder, are they just being like that normally? Like they're just kind of like looking at each other and, it's just very stoic in a way. And I think that's where this comes from. And also, they have opposing moons. His moon opposes her moon 4 degrees. So people who have moon opposing moon in a synastry chart, especially if you live together or you're in close proximity, you really see the world differently and you express your emotions differently in different or in the same situation. So it's like you're at a funeral with your significant other and you're crying and you're all broken up and your significant other is just sitting there poker faced and saying, why are you crying so much? Can't you control yourself? Or, that's just the way it is. And that's the energies of moon opposing moon. There's an emotional, you feel your emotions differently and project them differently than the other person. Now, her Jupiter conjuncts his Dionysus, 0 degrees. And Dionysus has to do with partying and drinking. And it could also signify drug addictions or substance abuse. So now I'm going to be walking into this house that further indicates that energy. There's Sappho, Maniac, Divine, Fantasia, Grim, and Atahualpa. And that's all conjuncting her south node. So whatever conjuncts your south node from the other person, you're comfortable with the energies that come into play, and you almost explain it away. Like that's just the way it is. But I'm going to break this down. His Sappho, that has to do with highbrow eroticism and the eroticism that comes from music and the arts. His Maniac, like I said before, moody, can be, unpredictable. And that coincides with his moon conjuncting his Sato, and in his natal chart, Mars squaring his Pluto. So she's just like, well, okay, that's just the way it is. And Divine, that's a bond. There's a bond between these two, but there's also Fantasia and Grim together. Fantasia has to do with fantasy, and Grim, like I said before, fairy tales. And Atahualpa has to do with cocaine abuse. So she pretty much accepts his bad behavior and explains it away. Now, I know that she has said maybe there's a problem with this and she's tried to help him and she doesn't want him to go down that road, but it's not like, I don't care what she says. The chart is telling me something differently, and it's almost like she accepts this, and it's pretty much like not a full-blown problem in her life with him. But because of the Neptune situation and this Fantasia and Grim, it's like she's in a fog about it in a way. She's like, well, that's just, okay, well, I'm going to help him and I can heal him. But again, I think the very strong part of this relationship there's a sexual connection, a fantasy sexual connection, and there is soul there, but it's not like a bells and whistles sort of love affair. Her Xanthopy and Bride conjuncts his Venus and Fantasia. Again, fantasy. Xanthopy has to do with domestic abuse. It's holding hands with Bride, which is her. So I think that she wears the pants in this relationship. He can throw temper tantrums all he wants and be moody and act like a child, but she puts her foot down and she tells him like it is. And this goes back to her Pluto conjuncting his ascendant with the control and the power. And his Venus conjuncting Fantasia, he likes fantasy. He loves fantasy, especially in a woman, and he's getting it in this relationship. Now, his point of fortune looks like a circle with a cross in the middle. It's conjuncting her Dolores at 1 degree. And his Dolores is conjuncting her vertex. Very important point in a synastry chart. It's like a second ascendant. Dolores has to do with pain and trauma. So he brings her pain. And there's just traumatizing effect. So I don't think that he can heal her. But he said that she heals him. So there's just this imbalance here, and emotional imbalance, definitely, due to moon opposing moon, the double whammies of moon squaring Neptune, the double whammies of Uranus squaring the moon as well, and it's just You're off in another land, both of them. But when the sex is there, Hermione conjuncts his descendant. Hermione, again, fantasy, waving a magic wand, magical powers like Hermione from the Harry Potter movie. And it also ties back to her Merlin conjuncting his moon. More magical, magician-like magical qualities. Her Mars and Psyche conjuncts his midheaven and Rufus. Now, when someone's Mars is conjuncting your midheaven, this can mean that there's like the social climbing status. The Mars person will benefit socially by knowing the ascended person. So she, obviously, she married him, and he's much more famous than she is. So she benefited from this relationship being with him. There was a social climbing in the ladder. And her Mars is also conjuncting his Rufus, and this has to do with drugs. So there's more indication of his drug abuse in this Synastry chart. So that's all I have, and I hope you enjoyed this interpretation. And if you would like to hear about more Synastry charts, hit the subscribe button because I'll be back again soon. Have a nice day.